Good morning and welcome back to week 6 of the DRK March to May Knit Along weekly Q&A. Today is pretty overcast and kind of sprinkling outside a bit, so I'm wrapped up in my Cinnabar shawl, knit up in spin cycle yarns dyed in the woolen versus. I'll pop a link down below for the pattern. Let's jump right into some questions. So the first question this week has to do with adding color to our knitting in all of its different forms. So they want to know the difference between stranded colorwork, intarsia, and mosaic knitting. Are there different uses for each, and how do you decide when to do one over the other? So let's start with intarsia. I am no intarsia pro. I haven't done a ton of it, but intarsia is for when you want to have a motif. A lot of times there are larger motifs that are in just one part of the fabric instead of being all the way across an entire row or round. And so to do that, you end up typically winding up some little bobbins or balls of that color of contrast yarn that hang to the back of your work. And so you just use those when you reach the area of the motif. But again, I haven't done it a ton, so I can't give too many tips there. The other two methods, stranded and mosaic, I do a lot of. So let's jump into that. I did actually grab a couple examples so I could show you. So let's start with mosaic. Mosaic knitting is a way to add colorwork motifs and patterns to your fabric by just simply slipping stitches instead of having to carry two colors at one time. So for every row or round, you're only using one of your colors, and the stitches you don't want to be in that color, you just slip them, carrying your yarn along on the wrong side of your work. This is really great for beginners because if you can knit and purl and slip a stitch, you could do mosaic knitting. It's a fun place to start. The floats are usually fairly short. A lot of times they're only 1, 2, 3 stitches long. I'll show you the wrong side of this hat so you can kind of see what it looks like on the inside. And the other thing I like about mosaic knitting is because you're not carrying more than one strand of yarn at a time, it doesn't add a lot of bulk. So I think it's a really, really fun technique. A lot of the patterns do tend to be more geometric because you're carrying stitches up. So that is gonna affect when you might wanna use this versus stranded knitting. So for the stranded knitting, I actually have a sneak peek of a new pattern that's coming out next month. So this is a new hat that's coming out. I actually have more than one version, but we'll just show this one for today. So this is stranded color work. And for this, you are holding a minimum of 2 colors for every row or round of that color work. I'll show you the wrong side on this as well. You can see that this has some longer floats. My tip for floats is I always prefer to carry them looser rather than tighter because I find that when we wear our knits and through blocking, looser floats will kind of shimmy into place where they need to be, where if that float's too tight, your fabric's gonna pucker and that yarn can just only stretch so much. But so that's the wrong side of my stranded color work. So I feel that with stranded color work, you have more flexibility in what you want to do with that pattern compared to mosaic where you have to carry stitches up. But they're both really fun. I highly recommend trying them out and seeing which you prefer. I love both. I bounce back and forth, and someday I'm going to get more into intarsia. I just haven't explored it very much yet. All right, I really, really, really want to learn brioche. I am an experienced knitter when it comes to colorwork, cables, lace, sweater construction, etc. But brioche is just one of those things I haven't learned yet and I want to. So I want to know resources, patterns, forms, etc. you'd recommend to knitters looking to get into the weeds of brioche. So I actually designed a hat. It's called the Harlow hat. And it is a reversible 2-color brioche hat. And I designed this specifically for people new to brioche. So this pattern, which again, I'll link to is really great because it comes with video tutorials, whether you knit English style or continental style. I did tutorials for both. So you'll learn the basics of 2-color brioche in the round, including decreasing. So that's a great place to start. There are online courses. I highly recommend, once we are back to being able to go take classes, I find that I see the most success with people who do have the opportunity to learn in person from somebody else. I've definitely seen loads of people be able to do it just from videos as well. The nice thing about learning in person is that sometimes, especially if you've been knitting for a long time, your muscle memory is so great that you kind of just want to jump into your rhythm, and that's where some wonky things can happen. Where if you have a teacher who can look over your shoulder, they might catch where something funky is going on. But my top tips for learning brioche, one is just slow down. Again, we kind of want to get right back into our rhythm, but brioche interrupts our usual stockinette stitch rhythm every other stitch. Every other stitch, you need to slip a stitch and wrap a yarn over. And so if you slow down, that really, really helps. Also, if you can release some of the fear that goes into learning brioche. As somebody who teaches brioche quite a bit, a lot of times students are quite nervous when they're coming in to learn it. So I always start by saying, if you can knit, purl, do a yarn over, and slip a stitch, you already have all the tools you need to brioche. It's just a combination of those techniques. So doing them slowly, creating that new muscle memory, and if you stick with it and you practice, it is so fun. And it'll be like, if you can remember when you first learned to knit and you got your rhythm, you're like, oh my gosh, this is so fun. Like when you got past the struggle of kind of fighting those tight little stitches off your needles, and it's just so meditative and relaxing. That is what brioche, it's like to the next level with brioche. It has this rhythm that is just very enjoyable. So I hope you'll try it. Just remember, be kind to yourself, go slow, and know if you can already do those 4 techniques, knit, purl, slip a stitch, yarn over, then you could absolutely brioche. So that's what I recommend. Check out my Harlow hat. That might be a good place to start. All right, question number 3. I want to know how you can avoid pain when you knit a lot. Do you, for example, take breaks every hour to stretch or things like that? When I knit a lot, my shoulder hurts and sometimes my wrist and elbow too. Right now I'm at a point where I'll probably have to see a specialist, but I wanted to know if there is stuff that you do to avoid that kind of pain. So the first thing I'll say is to check out Ergo I Knit. Carson Demers has written an entire book on this subject. He also teaches classes on this. So definitely check him out because he's a wealth of knowledge. One thing that I found helped that was completely unintentional and just like an added bonus was I learned how to knit the other way. So I used to knit English. That's how I learned when I was about 9 years old. So in my mid-20s is when I learned continental because I was becoming a teacher. I needed to be proficient in both styles while teaching different knitting techniques. And one day I realized that I was only picking up my yarn continental, and all the kind of tension that I used to feel in my hands and wrists was gone. I'm prone to carpal tunnel. I used to be a baker, and every career I've ever had uses my hands and arms. So I did have issues with soreness, but I think after so many years of knitting in that one style, switching it up just gave my hands a break. I'm using them in a different way. Different muscles are being activated, and that's felt really good for my hands. So it's maybe something to consider is checking out a different knitting style. Definitely stopping, taking breaks, stretching. If you just Google knit stretches, you can find tons of stuff on it. One of my favorites is simply just putting my arms straight out and pulling gently back on my fingers. And then also one like this. But yeah, just giving yourself breaks. It's that repetitive strain. And this is a little off topic, but I wanted to bring it up because I have learned that whenever I talk about this, that I am not alone and maybe it could be helpful. I have two autoimmune disorders. I have celiac disease and Hashimoto's, and Hashimoto's caused really bad joint pain for me. My knees and elbows were the most affected. And basically, if you have anything going on that causes inflammation in your body, it settles in our joints. So if you are experiencing a lot of joint pain, checking out to see if there could be any other underlying causes. And also the way that I've dealt with mine after it was pretty debilitating, I have radically changed my diet in the past couple years, and watching inflammatory foods. Now I can tell if I've had something that kind of sparks up that joint pain again. So there's certain foods that just naturally cause more inflammation in our body. So with my autoimmune disorders, I have to keep an eye on those anyways, but I really have found that my joint pain's gone down dramatically, and it's been such a relief. So anyways, kind of a random sidebar, but maybe you'll find that helpful. All right, how do we carry yarn up the side of a knit in a way that is both tidy and effective? So for this one, my tip is kind of like annoyingly simple, but I hope you find it helpful. The best thing I can tell you is to just remain consistent. However you're carrying up that yarn, do it the same way every single time, and that's what's gonna keep it tidy. And then just being careful to not be too tight, especially on those edges. If you're doing colors up the edge of a shawl, if you're doing some changing colors up the inside of a sweater, to really, really try not to be too tight. Leave a little, again, kind of back to that color work tip. I'd rather have that float up those rows be a little too loose than too tight, because I find with blocking and wear, it all settles in. But if it's too tight, it's just too tight. But really the main thing is just to do it the same way every time in that project. So if you're taking your other color and bringing the new color up over it, do that every single time so that it remains consistent. All right, how do you get the fit of a sweater perfect? I followed so many tutorials and find that there is always something off. Usually I wind up with a sweater too big even when I knit down a size and triple check gauge. So this is obviously a big question that could be a huge discussion all on its own, but I definitely felt this way for years. I would knit sweaters. My mom has a pretty fabulous hand knit sweater collection, because apparently I was really good at knitting sweaters that fit her really well and not myself. So if you constantly feel like you're knitting sweaters that are too big, that tells me that you need to go into your closet, find a sweater you love, even if it's a ready-to-wear sweater that you bought from a store, and measure that sweater. And then check that against your body measurements and use that as a guide when you're picking your sizes. Because it sounds like either you're picking styles that are maybe roomier and boxier, and have more positive ease that fit looser than you actually want to wear. Another thing, and I learned this, so I also used to be a hairdresser. I went to cosmetology school. And one of the things that I learned very quickly is people would bring in pictures of a hairstyle that they liked, and it wouldn't even be the hairstyle that they really liked. Like when you start asking yourself questions, sometimes we look at, it can be something like, for instance, in hair, sometimes it was just the way that hair was maybe curled, but they didn't actually like the cut, and sometimes they even liked the clothes. Like they just liked the way that person looked without really seeing, okay, does this suit my lifestyle? You know, can I still put my hair in a ponytail? Can I do this or that? So really like looking beyond the model that is wearing that garment, that sweater, whatever it may be, you kind of have to look past them and really start to look at it for yourself. Do you feel comfortable? Let's say it's depending on the style of the sweater, if it's a drop shoulder sweater, do you like how that sweater wears for you? Do you feel comfortable? If it has a really deep yoke, does that bother you when you're moving around during the day? Do you generally gravitate towards looser items in your wardrobe, or do you prefer tighter fitting garments? So really thinking about those things. I mean, it's helpful to even write a list, like go through pictures of yourself. I do this a lot. I will go back through old pictures and I'll try and find the ones where I can tell I'm feeling my most confident. And I remind myself of those things, because trends come and they don't always suit everyone. Like there are certain things where I'm like, oh, I love how that looks on that person, on that model, whoever's in the photo, but it actually doesn't look that great on me. It doesn't make me feel confident. I'm not comfortable in that style. It rides up, or whatever may, you know, whatever it may be. So really looking at, what do I feel most confident in? Why do I feel like just comfortable? I don't even think about what I'm wearing anymore, or I do, but only because I feel fabulous in it. And really kind of like thinking about those attributes. So when you're looking at a pattern, does that pattern have those attributes? Measuring that sweater that you love, that you know fits you well, and then checking the schematic or the finished circumference that you see listed in the pattern details, checking that out to say, okay, my sweater that I just measured that was in my closet is this big. How does it compare to this one in the size I thought I would pick? Does that mean the style does or doesn't work for me? Or does it mean that, oh, maybe I need to pick a different size than I thought I needed? It's actually really common for us to do that. A lot of times we can not gauge correctly the size that would fit us really well. Once you do knit a sweater that you really love, try and look at the details of that. What made the sweater work out so well for me? Was it the type of yoke it was? Was it the amount of ease it did or did not have? Was it the length? All those kinds of things. From there, you can then customize patterns once you feel comfortable with that, so that they're the length you feel best in, which kind of takes me back. I've mentioned this a few times, but this is where my magic numbers come in handy, where I'm like, I know if I am gonna wear a drop shoulder sweater, I generally find that 10 inches of positive ease is what's perfect for me and my style. That makes me feel really good. A round yoke sweater, a lot of times I don't like any ease. Length, I have a really short torso, so I tend to go a little shorter in the length of the body of the sweater. For sleeves, I know that I like 14 inches for 3/4 length. I like about 18.5 for wrist length. So those kinds of numbers, jotting them down so I can refer them, helps me feel really confident when I'm choosing a sweater to knit. So I hope you find that helpful. I will say Amy Herzog is a wealth of information when it comes to the fit of sweaters. I highly recommend checking out her books. She has a whole bunch of them, but she really explains why some sweater shapes may or may not feel the best on you. And I found it really helpful how she looks at all those just different target areas, and she shows a lot of different body types and styles that those body types might feel really good in. So I recommend checking that out. But I do think practice, and I think that once you have that successful one, it unlocks a whole new world and becomes a lot easier. I also think, and this will be, I know I'm kind of taking this one for a while, but weight of yarn. So what I have found is there are certain yarn weights when it comes to sweaters that I feel really good in, and others that I don't. I always want to knit a bulky weight sweater. I think they look so fun and fast, but in general, I don't love how they look on me, that I have trouble finding a good drape with a bulky weight yarn. The only exception to that rule for me is I have my oxbow cardigan, and that is a big shawl collar cardigan that's more almost like worn like a jacket. That works really well for me. But as far as doing like a round yoke bulky sweater, I would have trouble wearing that. It just doesn't it doesn't help me feel very confident. So paying attention to that too. What is the yarn weight called for? Because if you're used to wearing ready to wear sweaters and things like that, they are knit. I mean, that yarn a lot of time is like a thread, because a machine can knit it so much tighter and differently than we can with our hands. So if generally you do feel good and ready to wear sweaters and it's just the hand knits that you're not feeling super comfortable in, you might want to steer towards like a fingering or a sport weight sweater that, and even knit on a little bit bigger needles, might give you a drape more similar to what you're getting from a machine made store-bought sweater. So I hope that's helpful. I know that was a little bit all over the place, but all right, this is a little bit of a longer one, so I am gonna end this here, but I hope you find it helpful. As always, you can add questions to through the link down below. I have them all saved in a spreadsheet, so I'm gonna keep on answering them. I appreciate everyone who has submitted questions, and I'll also add links to the different things I talked about, as well as our knit along. It's not too late to join. Please feel free to come on over and join if you want to. We've got a forum for sweaters and a forum for shawls, and there's some fun new knit alongs coming up starting in May. So I'll be announcing those soon. If you're interested in that, along with special sales and tips, tricks, tutorials, recipes, fun things like that, make sure to sign up for my newsletter. Again, it's linked below. All right. Have a great weekend. Happy knitting.